Beneath the Autumn Sky by Audrey Sinclair. The small village of Ashcombe, nestled in the rolling hills of the English countryside, was a picture of tranquility. The year was 1823, and the village was a place where everyone knew everyone, and life moved at a leisurely pace. The arrival of a stranger was always an event of great interest, and when the handsome and enigmatic Mr. Nathaniel Blackwood arrived, the village buzzed with speculation. Nathaniel Blackwood was a man of mystery. Tall, with dark, brooding eyes and a commanding presence, he had taken up residence in the old Ashcombe Manor, a grand but neglected estate on the outskirts of the village. The manor had been vacant for years, and its sudden occupation by such a striking figure set tongues wagging. Among the most curious was Miss Eleanor Hartley, the daughter of the local vicar. Eleanor was a young woman of 22, with a keen mind and a heart full of dreams. She had grown up in Ashcombe, and while she loved her home, she often longed for something more. The arrival of Nathaniel Blackwood promised to be the most exciting thing to happen in Ashcombe in years. Eleanor first saw Nathaniel at the village church on a crisp Sunday morning. She was seated in the family pew, her hands folded neatly in her lap, when she felt a ripple of excitement pass through the congregation. She turned her head slightly and saw him enter the church. He was dressed in a finely tailored coat and breeches, his dark hair brushed back from his forehead. He moved with a grace that was almost feline, and his presence seemed to fill the small church. Eleanor felt a strange flutter in her chest as she watched him take a seat in the pew across from hers. She tried to focus on the vicar's sermon, but her eyes kept straying to Nathaniel. There was something about him that captivated her, something she couldn't quite put into words. After the service, the villagers gathered outside the church, eager to catch a glimpse of the newcomer. Eleanor lingered near the church door, pretending to adjust her bonnet, as she watched Nathaniel exchange polite greetings with the vicar and a few of the more prominent villagers. She noticed that his smile was polite but distant, and his eyes seemed to hold a hint of sadness. As Nathaniel turned to leave, his gaze met Eleanor's, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Eleanor felt a jolt of electricity pass through her, and she quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing with color. She could feel his eyes on her for a moment longer before he turned and walked away. The days that followed were filled with speculation about Nathaniel Blackwood. The villagers were eager to learn more about the mysterious newcomer, but he remained aloof, keeping to himself and rarely venturing into the village. Eleanor found herself thinking about him more than she cared to admit. She tried to convince herself that it was mere curiosity, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. One afternoon, Eleanor decided to take a walk through the woods near Ashcombe Manor. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves crunched beneath her feet as she made her way along the winding path. She had always loved the woods, with their dappled sunlight and the gentle rustling of the trees. It was a place where she could think and dream, away from the prying eyes of the village. As she walked, she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She turned to see Nathaniel Blackwood riding towards her on a magnificent black stallion. He reined in the horse as he reached her, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. "Good afternoon, Miss Hartley," Nathaniel said, his voice deep and smooth. Eleanor felt her heart skip a beat. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Nathaniel dismounted and walked towards her, leading his horse by the reins. "I see you enjoy the woods as much as I do," he said, his eyes scanning the trees around them. "Yes, I find them very peaceful," Eleanor replied, her eyes meeting his. Nathaniel smiled, and for the first time, Eleanor saw a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Peaceful, yes," he said, "but also full of life. There's something about the woods that makes one feel alive, don't you think?" Eleanor nodded, feeling a strange connection to him. "I do," she said softly. They walked together for a while, talking of the woods and the changing seasons. Nathaniel spoke of his travels and the places he had seen, and Eleanor listened, captivated by his stories. She found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone else, sharing her own dreams and aspirations. As the sun began to set, Nathaniel escorted Eleanor back to the edge of the woods. "I hope we can walk together again, Miss Hartley," he said, his eyes holding hers. "I would like that," Eleanor replied, her heart pounding in her chest. Nathaniel mounted his horse and tipped his hat to her. "Until next time," he said, before riding off into the gathering dusk. Eleanor watched him go, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She knew that her life in Ashcombe would never be the same again. The village of Ashcombe was abuzz with excitement as the annual harvest ball approached. It was the social event of the year, and everyone in the village looked forward to it with great anticipation. Eleanor had always enjoyed the ball, but this year she found herself looking forward to it with a sense of nervous excitement. She had seen Nathaniel several times since their walk in the woods, and each encounter had left her more intrigued by him. He was a man of contradictions, aloof yet kind, mysterious yet open. She found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. On the night of the ball, Eleanor dressed with extra care, choosing a gown of pale blue silk that complemented her fair complexion. Her maid, Mary, helped her arrange her hair in an elegant chignon, and she wore a simple pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother. The ball was held in the village hall, which had been decorated with garlands of autumn leaves and candles. The air was filled with the sound of laughter and music, and the room was a sea of swirling skirts and polished boots. Eleanor entered the hall on her father's arm, her eyes scanning the room for Nathaniel. She spotted him near the fireplace, talking to a group of villagers. He was dressed in a black coat and white cravat, his dark hair brushed back from his forehead. He looked every inch the gentleman, and Eleanor felt a thrill of excitement as she caught his eye. Nathaniel excused himself from the group and made his way over to her. "Miss Hartley," he said, bowing slightly. "You look radiant tonight." Eleanor felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she replied. "You look very handsome yourself." Nathaniel smiled and held out his hand. "May I have the honor of this dance?" Eleanor placed her hand in his, and they moved to the center of the room. The musicians struck up a waltz, and Nathaniel led her in the dance. Eleanor felt as if she were floating, her feet barely touching the ground as they moved together. Nathaniel's hand was warm on her back, and his eyes never left hers. As they danced, Eleanor felt a connection to him that went beyond words. It was as if they were the only two people in the room, and the rest of the world had faded away. She could feel the strength and gentleness in his touch, and she knew that she was falling in love with him. When the dance ended, Nathaniel led her to the edge of the room. "Miss Hartley," he said, his voice low and serious, "there is something I must tell you." Eleanor looked up at him, her heart pounding. "What is it, Mr. Blackwood?" Nathaniel took a deep breath. "I have been drawn to you since the moment I first saw you," he said. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met, and I find myself unable to stay away from you." Eleanor felt a surge of joy and fear. "Mr. Blackwood, Nathaniel interrupted her gently. "Please call me Nathaniel," he said, "and I would like to call you Eleanor, if I may." Eleanor nodded, her heart racing. "Nathaniel," she said softly. Nathaniel took her hand in his. "Eleanor, I know that we have not known each other long, but I feel a connection to you that I cannot ignore. I would like to court you, if you will allow me." Eleanor felt tears in her eyes. "I would like that very much," she said. Nathaniel smiled, and for the first time, Eleanor saw a look of pure happiness in his eyes. "Then it is settled," he said. "I will speak to your father tomorrow." Eleanor nodded, feeling a sense of peace and excitement. She knew that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Eleanor. Nathaniel called on her regularly, and they spent many hours walking together, talking, and getting to know each other. Eleanor found herself falling more deeply in love with him every day, and she could see that he felt the same way. One crisp autumn afternoon, Nathaniel took Eleanor for a walk to a secluded spot by the river. The trees were ablaze with color, and the air was filled with the scent of fallen leaves. They walked hand in hand, their conversation easy and comfortable. When they reached the river, Nathaniel stopped and turned to face her. "Eleanor," he said, his voice serious, "there is something I need to ask you." Eleanor felt her heart skip a beat. "What is it, Nathaniel?" Nathaniel took a deep breath and dropped to one knee. "Eleanor Hartley, you have brought light and joy into my life in a way I never thought possible. I cannot imagine my life without you. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Eleanor felt tears of joy fill her eyes. "Yes, Nathaniel," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." Nathaniel stood and took her in his arms, holding her close. Eleanor felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. She knew that her life with Nathaniel would be filled with love, adventure, and happiness. As they walked back to the village, hand in hand, Eleanor felt a sense of peace and contentment. She knew that she had found her true love, and that their life together would be everything she had ever dreamed of. The wedding of Eleanor Hartley and Nathaniel Blackwood was the talk of the village. It was a grand affair, held in the village church and attended by everyone in Ashcombe. Eleanor looked radiant in a gown of white silk, with a veil of delicate lace. Nathaniel was handsome and proud, his eyes filled with love as he watched his bride walk down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and as they exchanged their vows, Eleanor felt a sense of joy and fulfillment that she had never known before. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, Nathaniel took her in his arms and kissed her gently, sealing their love with a promise of forever. The reception was held at Ashcombe Manor, which had been transformed into a place of beauty and warmth. The grand hall was filled with flowers and candles, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter and music. Eleanor and Nathaniel danced together, their eyes never leaving each other, as the villagers looked on with smiles of approval. As the evening wore on, Eleanor and Nathaniel slipped away from the festivities and walked together in the gardens. The moon was full, casting a soft glow over the landscape, and the air was filled with the scent of roses. "Eleanor," Nathaniel said, taking her hand in his, "you have made me the happiest man in the world." Eleanor smiled up at him. "And you have made me the happiest woman," she replied. "I cannot wait to begin our life together." Nathaniel pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, a kiss filled with love and promise. As they stood together under the moonlight, Eleanor knew that she had found her true love, and that their life together would be everything she had ever dreamed of. Eleanor and Nathaniel's life together was everything they had hoped for and more. They traveled the world, exploring new places and experiencing new adventures. But no matter where they went, they always returned to Ashcombe, the place where their love had begun. Years later, as they sat together on the porch of Ashcombe Manor, watching the sun set over the rolling hills, Eleanor felt a sense of peace and contentment. She knew that she had found her true love. Nathaniel took her hand in his and smiled. "I love you, Eleanor," he said, "more than words can ever express." Eleanor smiled back at him, her heart filled with love. "And I love you, Nathaniel," she replied, "forever and always." As they sat together, hand in hand, watching the sun set on another beautiful day, Eleanor knew that their love would last for eternity. And in that moment, she felt truly blessed.